This program is proudly sponsored by Nowicki Carbone, personal injury lawyers.
Welcome to Conflict of Interest. I'm Greg Barnes. This is Sophie Black. Tonight, the budget, the economy, debt, what it all means. Just over a week ago, of course, Wayne Swan brought down the federal budget with the biggest deficit in Australian history at a touch over $58 billion. And the talk since, or the talk last week anyway, and into this week as well, has been how will Australia manage that debt? So we're going to talk tonight to our resident economic commentator, Daniel Liptak. He'll be joining the show later on in the second segment. But Sophie, debt and deficits are now dirty words.
It's the D word that dare not speak its name. In fact, I think in his speech to Parliament when he delivered the budget, the Treasurer, Wayne Swan, actually failed to mention the deficit, or made a point of not mentioning the deficit at all.
Don't talk about deficits.
Don't talk about deficits. And look, that's not to say they're ashamed of the deficit or defensive about the deficit. It's just that they knew that would not make good TV. The minute he mentioned the magic figure of $58.5 billion, the Parliament would be in uproar, there'd be shouting and laughing from the opposition, and that's what would get on the evening news.
Well, it's really interesting. You know, when I was in Canberra in between 96 and 99 working as John Fay's Chief of Staff, who was Federal Finance Minister, we used to continually, and Costello did it too, which was to continually plug the issue about this government's about savings, Keating was about deficits, you know, Labor's $10 billion deficit. As though it had real momentum in Voterland. I'm not sure it does. I suspect that although the government has taken a little bit of a dip in the polls in the last week, it's really, as somebody pointed out, only getting back to the 2007 election results, 52 to 47. But I just wonder whether there's the sort of obsession with not having debt and deficit out there in Voterland as there is in Canberra.
Well, I don't know. I think it feeds into this very old sort of political stereotype of the Labor government being the big spending government and the Liberals being the fiscal conservatives, and they're much better at balancing the budget. And if you go out on the street, if you went out and did a vox pop of the general public, I think you would find that stereotype would be repeated over and over again. And if you drill down into that and ask people what's so bad about having a deficit, yep, I'm not sure that people could answer that, because I think people think about having debt as sort of like
personal household debt,
sort of like a credit card debt. That can't be good. Debt is never good.
Well, they all have it too.
Yes.
Well, we all have it, I should say. Credit card debt.
Yeah,
that is.
Absolutely. I think that's how the ordinary voter sort of sees debt at a very simplistic level.
One of the things that's going to be created, one of the growth industries that's going to be created out of the deficit is the bond market, and the bond market was shut down by Costello because he effectively got Australia out of all government debt. Dan Liptak knows a bit about it, and we'll talk to him about it. But the bond market is going to be back in fashion, which means the whole issue of how Australia's perceived overseas in the markets will become relevant again. The issue of what that does to Australia's currency, what it does to our dollar. So we're in now a playing field that we haven't been in really since the early 1980s, when Keating talked about, the Banana Republic, 1986. So I think we're in for some really interesting times. But I just want to ask you this. Do you think that the government had any other choice but to do what it did last week and essentially slash and burn where it had to, but also spend up big?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people, I think that the government prefaced the budget by saying this is going to be the toughest budget in living memory, I think were the words used. And then they released it and everybody said, that's tough. That's not tough at all. So, because of this spending, but I think the government have said, look, the two stimulus packages prior to this have clearly kept the wolf from the door. This strategy is working, and we need to spend this money in order to stave off the worst of the recession. Some people are saying it's true that kind of spending has worked really successfully for Australia, and it's why we're in the position that we are now in, and that unemployment figures will not be as bad as a result of that spending. And, you know, we're in the worst recession since World War II, I think it is.
Yeah.
So these are very, very interesting times. So it's about balancing the budget with what's going on and what all the other outside factors that are going on. So many would argue that the government simply had to spend this money.
I have some sympathy for that view, and I think Malcolm Turnbull's budget reply response wasn't so much predicated upon they shouldn't have gone into deficit. It was more about the priorities in going into deficit and about the attack on, you know, for example, the Medicare rebate or sort of private health insurance rebate, the middle class welfare. I mean, I think one of the good things out of this budget was a big attack on the Howard government's middle class welfare. The middle class welfare created by the Howard government was just extraordinary, all in order to buy marginal seat votes.
Some people say they could have gone in harder, but they did introduce a surprise measure. From all there were so many leaks that most commentators were saying, "What's the point in turning up to the budget lockup?"
I thought that was well done,
everything.
actually. Did you think? I thought it was well done to get out a bad news story every few days.
And that's how they
for 3 or 4 weeks.
They mitigated the worst of the announcers by leaking them out steadily. They saved one surprise, which was to lift the official pensioner age to 67.
Which is a good idea.
And that will be phased in from 2017, I think.
I don't have a problem with that. And what's ironic about the Liberal Party arguing against it, in I think the 1999 budget, Costello brought out a document, Treasury brought out a document with Costello's name on it, which was all about, you know, the future, the next 40 or 50 years. And all these predictions were in there about how Australia wouldn't be able to afford its current pension rates if we continued to hold people at, you know, to getting out at 65. The superannuation schemes where people get out at 55 are unsustainable. All this was there. Now you've got, you know, sort of opportunism of Conservatives saying, and those in the Senate saying, "Oh, this is terrible to keep people working another 2 years." We're all living longer. Why wouldn't you work till, you know, 67? Make people work till they're 67.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, Peter Costello was actually out doing the media rounds this week.
He has been this week.
Launching his website, petercostello.com.au.
You know, he's sort of about 10 years behind. You know, everybody else went .com 10, 12 years ago. Costello's out there doing it. I've now got a website.
Yes, but on radio he wouldn't answer the question, if you were Treasurer today or Prime Minister, would you have a deficit? And if so, how big it would be? Wouldn't answer it.
Well, because he knows that it would have been impossible if they'd been re-elected to have kept the budget in surplus.
Absolutely.
Unless you were prepared to absolutely gut the economy. It would have been impossible. I mean, I think that the thing that people need to understand about debt is, in deficits, in relation to debt, it's the quality of your debt, it's what your debt's doing for you that's important.
Absolutely.
If it's just going on recurrent expenditure, it's a problem, but if it's going on infrastructure projects, it may be okay.
Well, we'll drill into that as well as infrastructure spending when we come back with Daniel Liptak.